Imagine this. A man is found dead, and right next to him is a note that seems to explain it all. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. In this case, the evidence pointed in two totally opposite directions, and figuring out the truth, that was going to be anything but simple.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's December 29th, 1995. A man, SD, who was separated from his wife, is found dead. He's in his son's bedroom on the family farm. And right there, next to his phone, his friends find a bottle of wine, a glass with this weird, oily green liquid in it, and a 3-page, handwritten note. At first, the police looked at all this and thought, okay, this is a pretty straightforward suicide. But the family just wasn't buying it. They pushed for an autopsy, and the results? They were a total shock. SD didn't die from his cancer. In fact, his cancer was in remission. No, he'd been poisoned with something called ethylene glycol.
So what exactly is ethylene glycol? Well, it's the main ingredient in car antifreeze. And here's the scary part. It has a sweet taste, which makes it super easy to hide in a drink, like, say, a glass of wine. But make no mistake, it's a brutal, slow-acting poison. For the first 12 hours or so, the victim just feels kind of drunk. But then, between 12 and 24 hours in, their heart and lungs start to fail. That can lead to a coma and, well, often death. And if they somehow survive that, the final stage is complete kidney failure. And SD, he was right in that fatal second stage when he passed away.
This discovery completely changed everything. And at the trial, it basically came down to two completely different stories. First up, let's look at the defense's argument that SD had tragically taken his own life.
And you know what? The defense had some pretty compelling points. They basically argued that antifreeze is a terrible murder weapon. Think about it. The liquid in the glass, it was bright green and oily, not exactly subtle. Plus, SD wasn't a big drinker, so how could a killer be sure he'd actually drink enough to die? And since the poison works so slowly, he had hours, literally hours, to pick up the phone and call for help. But the biggest thing? That note found at the scene specifically mentioned death-suicide. And to top it all off, a witness came forward and said SD had once told them that if he were ever to kill himself, he'd use antifreeze. So on the surface, that's a pretty powerful case for suicide, right? Yeah, that suicide theory seemed pretty solid. But as investigators started digging into the life of SD's estranged wife, CD, a very different and much darker picture began to emerge. The prosecution's case for a calculated murder really started to take shape. So now we get to the other side of the story. The prosecution argued this wasn't a suicide at all. They said it was a meticulously planned murder carried out by CD for a whole host of reasons: money, custody of their kids, and maybe even just pure hatred. Let's look at the timeline, because this is where CD's involvement gets really strange. The nights SD was poisoned, she herself admitted she was on the phone with him for hours. We're talking from 7 p.m. all the way until 4 in the morning. He died just 2 hours after that call ended. Just let that sink in. As the poison was literally killing him, she was the last person he talked to. And she never called for help, not once. And then there's CD's weird history with antifreeze. This wasn't some random thing for her. See, years before, a foster child in her care had actually swallowed some, so she knew exactly what it could do. Then, just a few months before SD's death, her own cat mysteriously died from antifreeze poisoning. It gets worse. Around that same time, she casually asks a neighbor, hey, how much antifreeze would it take to kill a person? And get this, her own daughter testified that she overheard her mom on the phone with a poison control center asking the exact same question. And later, CD actually went back to that neighbor and told them, hey, don't mention that conversation to the police. Talk about a red flag. So the big question is why? Why would she do it? Well, the prosecution pointed to a classic motive: money. CD was in a tough spot financially, living on only about $930 a month from disability. But right before SD's death, she somehow managed to put a $2,000 down payment on a new house, a $55,000 house. So you have to ask, where was that money going to come from? Well, her plan was pretty simple and pretty grim. She went to a real estate agent, to her mortgage broker, and told them that her husband, SD, was dying of cancer. She said she was about to inherit the farm they owned together, and she could just sell it to pay for the new house. Her entire financial future was built on one thing: SD dying very, very soon. There was just one massive problem with her story. It was a complete lie. SD's doctors confirmed it. His cancer was in remission. He was actually in pretty good health. So CD needed him to die to get that house. And she created this whole fake story to make it seem like his death was just expected. Okay, so the case against CD is definitely building, but it's all circumstantial, right? There's no smoking gun. In fact, for 18 long months, the investigation just stalled out. The police still had the death officially classified as a suicide. And then they got the breakthrough they needed. And it came from the most unexpected place you can imagine.
I mean, without a confession, without any direct physical evidence tying CD to the poison, it really looked like this case was just going to go cold forever.
But CD was eventually arrested. And while she was in custody waiting for her trial, she ended up in the same detention center as another inmate, a woman named Brandy Cameron. And what did CD do? She started talking. According to Brandy Cameron's testimony, CD confessed to everything. She straight up told Cameron she was in jail for murdering her husband. She even specified how she did it, saying she had put antifreeze in his wine. Now, this is what's known as a jailhouse informant, and testimony like this can be a total game changer for a prosecutor, but it's also really controversial because you always have to wonder about the informant's motives, right?
And CD apparently even gave her a chilling reason why. She told her cellmate she had to do it because SD had cancer and was dying anyways. So she just decided to help him on his way. That's a direct quote. And that justification? It's the exact same lie she'd been telling her real estate agent and everyone else.
With that confession, the prosecution finally had its smoking gun. The case went to trial, but it wasn't in front of a jury. It was a judge-alone trial. So this one person was left with the massive task of weighing two completely opposite versions of what happened. So how in the world did the judge make his decision? Well, he basically broke it down. Step 1, he looked at the suicide evidence, and he acknowledged it was puzzling. He didn't just dismiss it. Step 2, he had to weigh all that against the mountain of evidence pointing to murder. The money motive, the lies about the cancer, her creepy interest in antifreeze, that long phone call, all of it. Step 3 was huge. He had to decide if he believed the jailhouse informant, Brandy Cameron. And after carefully assessing her, he found her testimony credible, which brought him to his final conclusion. He said that a verdict of murder wasn't inevitable, but, in his exact words, it certainly was not unreasonable.
So when he put it all together, the motive, the means, the opportunity, and that damning confession, the judge found CD guilty of first-degree murder. And that's what makes the case of the antifreeze wine so fascinating and honestly so unsettling. It leaves us with this really tough question. When the physical evidence at a crime scene is so ambiguous that it could point to two completely different stories, a tragic suicide or a cold-blooded murder, how much circumstantial evidence, how much testimony from a jailhouse informant is enough? How much proof do you need to be certain beyond a reasonable doubt?